Welcome back. For the next several videos, I'm going to do some coaching that you can then use to coach your sages on how to connect with the arriving generations. This is the greatest thing that God has left us to do, is to pass wisdom, insight, knowledge, and mistakes, and how to avoid those mistakes on to the next generation. But that doesn't happen naturally, not in North American society, and particularly not at this era of time. Because again, there's this mindset of almost shelving people who were not brought up in this digital age. And here's the thing. I want to influence the church of 50 years from now. I've written almost 40 books that I hope still have some legs under them. 50 years, 100 years, 250 years from now, if the Lord tarries. That's part of the reason for writing. But beyond that, I cannot influence people with whom I do not interact. Sure, I can influence people by a book. I can do it with a blog post. I can do it with my website. I can do it with podcast. But for most of those of the sage age, it's going to happen either one-on-one or it's going to happen in relatively small groups. We have to be the people who cause that to happen. Okay? So, I want you to think about this. We're having a sages meeting on Tuesday night, 7 o'clock. Those of you who are 55 plus, meet at the church. We're going to have a devotion. We're going to eat such and such. And it's a great time. We get there. Everybody in the room is 55 and up. We enjoy each other's company. We may influence each other. We may be a benefit to each other. We have not influenced the arriving generation. They're not there to be influenced. So there is an issue, and we're going to talk about that issue as we work through some of this. Now, what I envision is that we figure out how to change some of these things. How much does this matter? Jewish rabbis say that Abraham died the year that Jacob fled from Esau, his brother. Abraham had been alive when Jacob was a young man. Esau, a man of the fields, hunter, away from home, likely had no interest in walking with Abraham and talking with him. Jacob, a man at home, walks with his grandpa and he listens to the stories of faith and the call of God and God providing a sacrifice instead of killing Jacob's dad. And something settles into Jacob, some idea of the significance of what God was doing, and he begins to aspire to having this, that I want that kind of blessing and I want that kind of birthright. Generational transition, grandpa to grandson. That's exciting. That's wonderful. You see it with Moses influencing Joshua and Elijah influencing Elisha and Paul impacting Timothy and Titus and Barnabas, being such a shaper of the life of John Mark. They transitioned their experience. They transitioned their knowledge. They transitioned their insight. The clearest indication of our responsibility in this is when Paul wrote to Timothy and said, I want you to take what I've given you and give it to faithful men who will pass it on to other faithful men. And of course, I'm paraphrasing that. There are two qualifiers in what Paul wanted Timothy to do. Number one, don't just give what I have given you to anybody, give it to faithful men. And the second qualifier is pick up on the fact that who you give it to is not going to be a Dead Sea, but they're going to pass it on to someone else. Responsibility, generations, stacking atop generations to make an impact. Getting what I envision accomplished is going to take strategy. It's going to take ongoing effort. The main reason is that for at least a generation and a half, the body of Christ has created insular groups based on age, college and career, young marrieds, teens, junior high, children, sages. And those groups are ministered to. The only time the various groups come together is in a handful of worship services. If I worship across the building from a person who is 22 years old, and that's the only time that we're within 50 feet of each other, the odds of me influencing him goes to nothing. And this is where the idea in the business world of silos comes into play. A silo is a tall structure for storing grain. Several silos may exist on an acre of farmland, but every silo is distinct. It has no connection to the silo alongside it. And in church, silo ministry happens when children's ministry operates independent of youth ministry. Young adult ministry, young marriage ministry operate with no interaction with sages. I want you to think about how silo ministry is not particularly healthy. Okay, now I'm going to move beyond sages here for just a minute. But since no consideration is given to what a 13-year-old must know as he moves into adolescence, or what he should know, with the silo approach, it is highly unlikely that the children's ministry has done as much as it might intentionally to prepare that 13-year-old for adolescence. So there is no continuity. Are 15, 16, and 17-year-olds prepared to date and to make a decision that I'm only going to date people who I anticipate that I might marry, and here are the qualifications that I want, and I'm not going to take anything less than that, and it be biblically based? Do you see what I'm talking about? Are we preparing, are we connecting people for the next stage, for the next season of life? Now, that little bit of trail that I chased down was by intent. It was to help you think about the limited interaction between your sages and teens in the church, the sages and young adults, the sages and young married couples, the sages and those who are middle-aged. Bible's clear. The sages, the elders, are to transfer their insight to the arriving generation. But how can that happen if the married couples are over here in one silo, the sages are here in another silo, and there is no connection? There's no interaction. This group over here, locked into this building, cannot impact this group over here who are in an entirely different silo. So, this is where I begin making people uncomfortable. Change. To overcome what I've described, there has to be a vision from the pastor. There has to be a vision from the sage's ministry leader as well. And then, beyond vision, there has to be an ongoing strategy. if there's not vision and then the strategy to make it intentionally happen, in other words, I'm saying if you're just hoping this takes place, it won't. If you're just anticipating that they're accidentally going to bump into each other on the aisle and the glory of God that's been on a sage is going to fall on a 17-year-old, it's not. Okay? This has to be intentional. And if it's not intentional, your Abrahams will never impact and influence your Jacob. Your Pauls are not going to impact and influence Timothy. And Elijah is never going to become a mentor for the Elishas who are coming behind him. What we need is this thing called osmosis. Osmosis is the process of gradual or unconscious assimilation of ideas or knowledge. And it's going to come up several times in the next few videos. So several problems are on the table. First problem is this: people 55 and up have life experience that could be a benefit to those coming behind, but those life experiences are locked away in an inaccessible library. It's not written, it's not recorded, it's simply there, but no one has access to it. Okay, second challenge. Because it's not accessible, wisdom, knowledge, and experience are not transitioned. There is no handoff from one generation to the one coming behind. Third, our ministries are generally structured in silos. There is age segregation, and never the two age groups shall meet. And the fourth, we've not understood that impact and influence and this thing, osmosis, only happens where there is intimacy and interaction. So, 4 problems on the table. If you're a leader, be thinking about solutions. Remember, you've heard somebody say that the quickest way to gain influence is to be a problem solver. Be thinking about what can be done to solve the problems. We're going to jump into it in the next video. The project, look at the 4 problems that have been brought to light, and in regard to one of those challenges, develop at least 2 possible solutions. Okay? Sages, leaders, problem solvers, let's work together. Let's get it done. See you in the next video.